Take a second and look down at the nail on your pinky finger. It is a tiny, flat, unremarkable bit of keratin, no different from the nails on billions of other hands currently scrolling through phones or gripping coffee mugs. For most of us, this little feature is so mundane it borders on invisible. We assume that because we have it, it has always been the standard design for a human being. But 40,000 years ago, if you had looked at a different pair of hands in a cave in the Dordogne Valley or a forest in Siberia, those nails might have been thicker, the bones beneath them denser, and the hands themselves capable of crushing a modern athlete's grip without trying. Those hands belonged to people who were not us, yet were every bit as human. They made art, they spoke, and they dreamed. Today, those species are gone, and we are the only ones left to look at our hands in the light of a fire. It feels like a natural progression, a quiet passing of the torch. But it wasn't a peaceful retirement. We live in a biological anomaly. For almost the entire 6 million-year history of the hominin lineage, the Earth was a crowded place, home to a variety of human-like species coexisting across different continents. We often imagine a straight line of evolution, a single file of apes slowly standing more upright until they become us, but the reality was a messy, sprawling bush of different experiments in being human. As recently as 50,000 years ago, a blink of an eye in evolutionary terms, at least 6 different species of humans walked this planet. There were the Neanderthals in Europe, the Denisovans in Asia, the diminutive hobbits of Flores, the mysterious Homo luzonensis in the Philippines, and the long-lived Homo erectus. And then there was us. Within a few thousand years of modern humans expanding out of Africa, every single one of those other lineages vanished. It is the greatest vanishing act in the history of the world, and we were the only ones standing on stage when the lights came up. You might think this was just a matter of us being smarter, but intelligence is a slippery thing to measure in a fossil. This leads us to the first great myth of our origins, that the other humans were primitive, bumbling brutes who simply couldn't keep up with our superior brains. The evidence says otherwise. Let's look at the Neanderthals, our most famous cousins. For decades, they were depicted as hunchbacked scavengers, but the archaeology of the last 20 years has demolished that image. In 2010, the first draft of the Neanderthal genome, led by Richard Green and Svante Pääbo at the Max Planck Institute, revealed that their brains were actually larger on average than those of modern humans. They didn't just survive in the harsh climates of Ice Age Europe. They thrived for nearly 400,000 years. They were master craftsmen. At sites like Abri du Maras in France, researchers found evidence of Neanderthals making string and cordage, a technology once thought to be unique to us. They used the Levallois technique to flint-knap stone tools with surgical precision, a process that requires sophisticated, multi-step planning. They weren't failing at life. They were a highly successful, deeply entrenched species that had survived climate shifts that would have broken us. You might assume their extinction was an inevitable biological failure, but that ignores the timing. The Neanderthals had survived dozens of volcanic eruptions and glacial cycles, but they couldn't survive the arrival of a specific kind of primate from the south. The mystery isn't why they died, but why they died exactly when we showed up. This raises a question that most paleoanthropologists find deeply uncomfortable. Did we walk into their homes and murder them, or did we kill them in a way that left no bruises on the bone? It is easy to imagine a prehistoric war, but the reality of interspecies competition is rarely that cinematic. When two species occupy the same ecological niche, they don't necessarily need to fight for one to disappear. One just needs to be slightly better at taking what the other needs to survive. And in the world of the Ice Age, the most valuable resource wasn't gold or land. It was calories. But saying we were better is too vague for science. We need to look at the specific measurable advantages that modern humans brought into these territories. One of the most significant was social. In 2013, researchers including Eileen Pierce and Robin Dunbar argued that while Neanderthal brains were large, they were wired differently. A greater portion of their neural tissue was dedicated to vision and physical body control, necessary for the low light of European winters and their massive muscular frames. Modern humans, by contrast, had larger frontal lobes and more developed social processing centers. We lived in larger groups. While a Neanderthal band might consist of 20 individuals who rarely met outsiders, sapiens were building vast, sprawling social networks. We know this because of trade. Archaeology shows sapiens moving seashells and specific types of flint over hundreds of miles. We were sharing information, tools, and support across distances that a Neanderthal couldn't conceive of. In a bad winter, a Neanderthal group was on its own. A sapiens group could call on cousins 3 valleys away for help. This makes it sound like we won through the power of friendship, but a larger social network is also a more efficient machine for resource extraction. If sapiens were 10% better at hunting or gathered 5% more tubers because they shared better information, the math of extinction becomes relentless. This is the principle of competitive exclusion. If 2 species are competing for the same food, and one has even a tiny advantage, the other will eventually be pushed into marginal, low-quality habitats. In 2010, Curtis Marion's work at Pinnacle Point in South Africa showed that sapiens had mastered the use of coastal resources, like shellfish, which provided a stable, high-protein diet that fueled our population growth. As our numbers swelled, we simply squeezed the others out. We didn't need to hunt them if we could just hunt all their food. This kind of demographic pressure is a slow-motion genocide, a disappearance by attrition that leaves the landscape empty of everyone but the winner. You might argue that this was a fair fight of biological superiority, but that assumes the playing field was level, and it ignores the possibility that we brought something much more lethal than a larger social circle. We were coming from the tropics of Africa, a literal hotbed of evolution for viruses and bacteria. When sapiens moved into Europe and Asia, we weren't just carrying spears. We were carrying a biological cocktail of pathogens that we had evolved to tolerate, but which the isolated Neanderthals and Denisovans had never encountered. This theory, explored by researchers like Charlotte Holdcroft from the University of Cambridge in 2016, suggests that tropical diseases like tuberculosis, stomach ulcers, and even certain strains of herpes could have been devastating to northern hominins. Think of the contact between Europeans and the indigenous peoples of the Americas in the 16th century. Smallpox didn't need a sword to destroy empires. It would be convenient to believe that disease was the primary culprit because it absolves our ancestors of intent. If they died of a cough, we aren't murderers. But the archaeological record contains a much darker technological reality that disease cannot explain. Around the time sapiens entered Neanderthal territory, we see the sudden appearance of projectile weapons. The Neanderthals were ambush hunters. They used heavy, thrusting spears that required them to get close to their prey and to their enemies. They had the skeletons of rodeo riders, covered in healed fractures from close-quarters combat with megafauna. Sapiens, however, were using the atlatl, or spear thrower. This simple lever allowed a human to launch a projectile at over 100 miles per hour from a distance of 30 yards. We could kill from the shadows. In any direct confrontation, a Neanderthal was a tank, but a sapiens was a sniper. This technological gap creates a terrifying dynamic. If a conflict did break out over a hunting ground or a cave system, the sapiens didn't have to risk a fair fight. We could stand on a ridge and rain death down on a species that literally couldn't reach us. There is a site in the Czech Republic called Mladich, where the remains of sapiens were found alongside pierced animal teeth and decorative items, dating to about 35,000 years ago. Not far away, the Neanderthals vanish from the record entirely. It wasn't just that we were better at hunting deer, it's that we were the most dangerous thing that had ever walked into their world. But even the best weapons don't explain the most haunting piece of evidence we've found in the last decade. If we were truly their enemies, why do we carry their ghosts in our blood? In 2010, the scientific world was rocked by the discovery that most modern humans are between 1% and 4% Neanderthal. We didn't just replace them, we absorbed them. This wasn't a clean extinction. It was a messy, intimate entanglement, and it wasn't just the Neanderthals. In the Denisova cave in Siberia, researchers led by Viviane Slon and Svante Pabo found a tiny bone fragment from a girl they nicknamed Denny. DNA analysis in 2018 proved she was a first-generation hybrid. Her mother was a Neanderthal, and her father was a Denisovan. These different species were meeting, talking, and having children. This complicates the murder narrative immensely. You don't have children with a species you view only as a biological rival. At some level, there was a recognition of shared humanity. This sounds like a beautiful story of ancient integration, but the genetics tell a more sinister version of the tale. When we look at the Neanderthal DNA in your own genome, it isn't evenly distributed. It is missing from crucial areas, particularly the genes associated with brain development and speech, like FOXP2. This suggests that while we could interbreed, the hybrids often suffered from reduced fitness. They were less likely to survive or reproduce. Furthermore, we find almost no Neanderthal DNA on the Y chromosome or in the mitochondrial DNA of modern humans. This is a massive red flag in population genetics. It suggests that while sapiens men were having children with Neanderthal women, those children, or at least the males, might have been sterile. We were effectively genetic swamping them. We were breeding them out of existence, one generation of sterile or disadvantaged hybrids at a time. You might think this process was accidental, a byproduct of biological incompatibility, but the speed of the replacement suggests a deliberate push. Look at the island of Flores in Indonesia. For hundreds of thousands of years, a species of tiny humans called Homo floresiensis lived there, hunting pygmy elephants and avoiding giant storks. They were isolated and safe until about 50,000 years ago. For years, scientists thought they survived until 12,000 years ago, which would have meant a long period of coexistence. But in 2016, a massive redating effort by Thomas Sutikna and his team at the Griffith University showed that the hobbits actually vanished much earlier, almost exactly when the first sapiens arrived in the region. It is a recurring pattern. We arrive, and the locals disappear. Whether it's the mountains of Europe or the islands of Indonesia, our arrival is the common denominator of death. This brings us to the most uncomfortable realization of all. We are not the pinnacle of a long line of progress. We are the sole survivors of a prehistoric culling. The other species didn't just fail. They were likely pushed, starved, infected, and outmaneuvered by a species that was more aggressive and more socially organized. We often talk about the sixth extinction that we are currently causing in the animal kingdom, but we forget that the first species we drove to extinction were our own brothers and sisters. We cleared the room so we could be the only ones talking. We are the ones who remained not because we were the kindest, but because we were the most effective at occupying space. And that effectiveness came at a cost that we are only now beginning to measure. You could argue that we didn't know what we were doing. Evolution doesn't have a moral compass. It just has survivors. But the archaeological record shows that we were already a species capable of deep symbolic thought. We were painting lions on cave walls and carving flutes from bird bones. We knew what death was. We buried our own dead with ochre and beads. When we looked across a valley and saw a Neanderthal family sitting by their fire, we didn't see an animal. We saw another version of ourselves, one that was slightly different, slightly stronger, and competing for the same deer we needed to feed our children. The choice wasn't between being a murderer or a saint. It was between our children surviving or theirs. And we chose ours, every single time, across every continent we touched. This reality reframes our entire understanding of human nature. We aren't just the wise man, which is what Homo sapiens means. We are the exclusive man. Our ability to form tight-knit groups and view others as competitors is a trait that allowed us to conquer the planet, but it is also the trait that left us alone on it. The missing branches of our family tree aren't just scientific curiosities. They are a warning. We carry the Neanderthal and Denisovan DNA as a trophy of a war we don't remember winning. We are a species of survivors who proved so good at the game of life that we ran out of opponents. But as we look at the world today, we have to wonder if the traits that allowed us to eliminate the Neanderthals are the same ones that will eventually turn us against ourselves. It is easy to find this depressing, to see our origins as a blood-soaked tragedy. But there is a different way to look at the bones in the dirt. At Gorham's Cave in Gibraltar, researchers found a strange geometric carving on a rock platform, a series of intersecting lines made by a Neanderthal hand more than 39,000 years ago. It's been called the Neanderthals hashtag. It doesn't mean anything to us, but it meant something to them. It was an assertion of presence. I am here. I see this world. They were not just biological entities to be replaced. They were minds that experienced the universe. They felt the cold of the wind and the warmth of the sun just as you do. When we look at the extinction of the other humans, we are looking at the loss of entire ways of being. We didn't just lose a few species. We lost different flavors of consciousness. You might think we can never truly know them, that they are too far gone. But that brings us back to the genetic legacy. The DNA we carry isn't just a biological fluke. It's a living museum. When a person from Tibet survives in the thin, high-altitude air of the Himalayas, they are doing so using a genetic variant for blood oxygenation that they inherited from the Denisovans. When your immune system recognizes a specific type of viral infection, it might be using a receptor protein that was perfected in a Neanderthal body 250,000 years ago. They are not entirely gone. We absorbed their strengths, their adaptations, and their history. We are a mosaic species, built from the pieces of the people we replaced. We are the walking evidence of their existence. This doesn't make the loss any less chilling. For most of our history, being human was a plural experience. To be human was to be one of many types of beings who could think and speak. Now, to be human is to be alone. We have no one to talk to who isn't us. We have no other perspective on what it means to have a soul or a language. We are like a person who has spent their whole life looking in a mirror and has forgotten that other people exist. The silence of the other species is a profound loneliness that we have lived with. For so long, we've mistaken it for the natural state of the world. But the fossils remind us that the world was once much louder, much more diverse, and much more crowded than we can imagine. So, what is the final verdict? Did we kill the other humans? The science doesn't give us a single smoking gun, but it gives us 1,000 coincidences that all point in the same direction. We were the fire that swept through the forest. Some of the trees were burned, some were cut down for fuel, and some were grafted into our own garden. But the forest that existed before us is gone, and it isn't coming back. We are the architects of a world with only one kind of human, and we achieve that goal through a combination of social brilliance, technological ruthlessness, and biological luck. We are the ultimate invasive species, and our first victims were our closest relatives. Look again at the nail on your pinky finger, that small, flat, unremarkable bit of keratin. We are the only species left on this planet that has a nail exactly like that. But that isn't a badge of honor or a sign of divine favor. It is a reminder of a time when the world was full of different kinds of hands, different kinds of eyes, and different kinds of dreams. Those other hands are all bones now, buried under layers of cave floor and river silt. We are the ones who outlasted them, the ones who took their hunting grounds and their caves and even their children. We are the survivors of a prehistoric struggle that left us as the sole masters of the earth. And the most chilling thought of all is that the only reason you are here to look at that fingernail is because your ancestors were the ones who didn't hesitate to make sure the other hands stopped moving. We are the descendants of the winners, and in the game of human evolution, winning meant that everyone else had to die. Our very existence is the definitive closing argument for our capacity to eliminate anything that stands in our way, even if it looks exactly like us. For thousands of years, we shared this planet with people who were almost us, people who cared for their weak and mourned their dead just as we do. Now, we are alone. We have inherited the earth, but we did so by turning our cousins into ghosts. Every time you use those hands to build, to create, or to strike, you are using tools that were forged in the shadow of a global disappearance. We are the only humans left, not because we were the best, but because we were the last ones standing in a room we emptied ourselves. If you found this dive into our dark origins as fascinating as it is unsettling, consider subscribing for more journeys into the secrets of our past. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Do you think our species is still driven by the same instincts that cleared the planet of our cousins? Let's talk about it. Until next time, keep looking at the world with curious eyes, and remember that the most mundane details of your life are often the traces of a history much older and much darker than we dare to admit.